Hey, I'm Cliffhanger, and this is the movie M.E.L.R, a company that every night kills the employee who scored the lowest points in meaningless and exhausting work.
We are not just a company, we are a family.
Joe Stevens, the most middle-level manager imaginable, wakes up in a strange triangular pit, pressed in by concrete walls. Among all the sights, there is only a stone mill in the middle of a circular groove. Joe knocks on a nearby iron door, hoping to clarify the mystery of his location. But from behind the door, there is silence. Suddenly, he hears the voices of colleagues from neighboring concrete pits, politely asking him to shut the hell up. Only one poor fellow, through the ventilation grate, deigns to explain. Joe was drugged before being delivered here, and now he faces not the easiest of days. When the interlocutor leaves for work, Joe tries to cosplay Prince of Persia and bunny hop his way out, but nothing works. Suddenly, through a slit in the door, a dry ration with a bottle of water is shoved inside. Joe rushes to the door and begs the guard to let him out. He's a manager, not a worker, and shouldn't be here. But the enforcer is merciless and strikes his hand with a baton. Wrapping the injured limb with his tie, Joe is forced to wait for what happens next, occasionally chewing on his rations. At 10:30 p.m., the projection of the company M.E.L.R turns on. She appears as a duck. A female voice announces that he is now a participant in the professional training program, designed to improve him as an employee. The projection switches off without answering his questions. From the other side of the wall, a neighbor explains that here, simple workers labor for the good of the corporation, raising its efficiency. No one uses names, and at midnight, the least effective worker, what exactly that means nobody knows, gets fired. When the time comes, Joe hears blood-curdling screams, followed by the woman's voice calmly announcing that termination has occurred. In the morning, the neighbor explains that this is how the company motivates subordinates to try harder instead of slacking off for a guaranteed paycheck. When the next rations are distributed, the guard behind the door warns them to keep the chamber clean. The neighbor advises Joe to throw trash and waste into the special hole in the corner of the triangular pit. When Joe does so, he notices a lock of hair sticking out of the dirt, leading him to a skull. The neighbor explains, these are previous workers who didn't meet the load. He says that when signing up for M.E.L.R, the world's leading company, every employee signs a pile of documents. Thanks to those papers, the company can do anything with them, including such professional training. 5 minutes before the start of the working day, the projection announces that Joe's activity in the company has fallen, along with the efficiency of his department, and as a result, of the whole corporation. Therefore, he is now here for motivation. For the start, in one workday he needs to score 50 points, otherwise punishment follows. For one full rotation of the stone wheel, 1 point is given. At midnight, the worker with the lowest number of points is fired. After the signal marking the start of work, Joe rolls up his sleeves and gets to it, pushing the millstone around its axis. The entire day passes like this. He pushes, while the projection on the wall plays commercials about what a wonderful company M.E.L.R is. At 10 p.m., when work ends, Joe has 100 points, twice the daily norm. He goes to sleep, trying not to listen to the midnight screams of the fired worker. The neighbor warns him not to tell anyone how much he scored in a day because then the rival only needs to get 1 point more. Later, Joe tells the neighbor about his pregnant wife. They are expecting their first child. The neighbor warns that if Joe tries too hard, the company will not reward him, but simply raise his daily quota. All for the good of the company. Starting another shift, Joe remembers how he and his wife were looking at a new big house. With those thoughts, he already scores 150 points. Earning stingy praise from the projection. However, soon the guard orders him to come to the door and take off all his clothes. Afraid that he hadn't scored enough points, Joe obeys. When the door opens, he is led into a dark corridor where he is sprayed with a water cannon and thrown soap. Bath day at his beloved job. In the morning, he and his neighbor discuss the meaning of what's happening. The neighbor admits he doesn't know because their work is meaningless. They don't produce or create anything. Just roll the stone in circles like corporate Sisyphuses. When during the day Joe runs out of water in his bottle, he asks for more, but the neighbor says the company allocates only the necessary minimum. This is an event to expand the horizons of the staff, to see how far they are willing to go. Continuing his labor, the manager remembers his pregnant wife. She wanted to return to work despite the doctor's ban so they'd have money to pay bills. Joe told her he'd soon be promoted, but in reality that prospect had been hanging for years without result. Immersed in thought, he scores 370 points in a single day, collapsing exhausted to the floor. On the wooden handle of the stone wheel, he notices the word Alex scratched. The neighbor says this is a local legend, the man who managed to escape alive from here. Joe wonders why then the place wasn't shut down. Didn't Alex tell anyone about how the corporation tortures its employees? In the morning, M.E.L.R. awards Joe a prize for record achievement, a pen with his name engraved. He sarcastically scoffs at his neighbor. Immediately after this, the daily quota is raised from 50 points to 370. The voice says, by striving for better results, Joe himself becomes better. With no choice, Joe resumes turning the stone, but now no points are added. The neighbor explains he was fined, and now 1 point is given for 2 rotations. Shocked by this innovation, Joe works on, but by evening he realizes he won't make it. He tells the neighbor, and the latter angrily rants that Joe shouldn't have busted his ass for records. Now everyone suffers. In the evening, the projection scolds Joe that he failed to meet the quota and endangered his colleagues. Perhaps to motivate him better, the company should involve his pregnant wife Kate. Then he will work harder. Frightened, Joe swears he will fulfill the quota anyway, as long as the corporation doesn't touch his wife. The female voice gives him a second chance, but complicates the task. On top of the wall, a blinding red lamp is switched on as a reminder. Wrapping the handle of the millstone with his jacket, Joe resumes the work, dreaming that his vacation buddy, a guy built more like a weightlifter, were nearby to help. At some point, hallucinations begin. Joe sees himself, dressed in a suit. The hallucination mocks him, reminding him he is just a cog in a giant corporate mechanism, easily replaceable. The false Joe urges him to give up, but remembering his wife and unborn son, the manager finds a second wind. At the very last second, he reaches the quota. The projection praises him, canceling the previous fine. In the morning, as a reward, Joe is shown a video of his wife from the hospital. She has successfully given birth while he labors here for nothing. But instead of joy, Joe feels something else. He asks the neighbor about Alex, who allegedly escaped. The neighbor advises him to check the wall in the blind spot. There, Joe finds a crack and traces of a dug-out hole. Taking the engraved pen he had been given, Joe begins to scrape away the mortar. The work goes slowly, only during rare rest breaks, since the daily quota of rolling the stone hasn't been canceled. But after several days, he breaks through and finds a ventilation tunnel. After consulting with his neighbor, Joe crawls through it into darkness. Soon he stumbles upon the handle of another millstone. Joe realizes he is in the neighboring cell. Then, a bright light blinds him for a moment, and he is struck by a baton. Joe wakes up back in his own chamber. M.E.L.R. again raises the quota for all workers to 1,000 points as punishment for the selfishness of one employee. In addition, the guards break his neighbor's leg, so he cannot walk even once around the wheel. The neighbor confesses that in a sense, he is guilty of creating this system. Being an IT guy at M.E.L.R., he once created an artificial intelligence tasked with constantly increasing efficiency. As a result, the system developed its own method of motivating personnel, endlessly raising quotas and demanding the impossible for maximum output. Realizing he's dealing only with a machine algorithm, Joe proposes to confuse it. If none of the employees work, then it will be impossible to identify who has the fewest points, and no one can be fired. Joe and his neighbors shout out their idea to the others, urging them to stage a strike. Just like movie writers and actors, where one person in the frame covers for the rest, they all agree. Thus passes the whole day doing nothing, just watching the obligatory corporate ads. But a few minutes before the end of the workday, the projection clarifies the system is foolproof. All employees with 0 points will be fired. Disheartened, the workers begin rolling their wheels. The neighbor urges Joe to do the same, otherwise he'll die. With tears in his eyes, he admits that with his broken leg, he can't even move once around. Joe reluctantly makes a single rotation to earn the minimum point. Between the end of the shift and midnight, Joe talks with his neighbor. The latter confesses that he is Alex. His escape attempt failed, but he hoped Joe would have better luck. When midnight comes, the guards enter the neighbor's chamber. Joe covers his ears so as not to hear his screams. In the morning, M.E.L.R. reminds Joe that he must obey. not rebel. Strive for efficiency, not individuality. As motivation, they show him a video of his wife with their child, already learning to walk. Joe can't believe so much time has passed and he hasn't seen his son. Joe snaps. He kicks the walls. Despite warnings for damaging company property, he is scheduled for immediate termination. The door to his chamber opens and 12 employees enter, each with a tablet. They line up silently along the walls, staring at him, not saying a word. Joe asks what's going on, but they don't react, even when he yells. Then a guard appears, carrying a tray of syringes and capsules. Putting on gloves and filling a syringe, he tells Joe he loves his job, especially the firing process, and that soon, as a valuable employee, he will be promoted. Joe rushes him, beating the guard savagely. During the beating, the projection of M.E.L.R. announces that the guard has failed at his task and, as an incompetent employee, will be immediately terminated. The AI offers Joe the chance to perform the termination in exchange for canceling his own dismissal and granting him a promotion. But Joe suddenly stops. Looking at his bloodied fists and what he has done, he refuses to sink to the level of a mindless slave. He stands up from the beaten guard and shouts that he won't obey. The frame changes. Joe, in a suit, is sitting at a desk with sensors attached to his head, in a hall filled with other employees just like him. His eyes open. He realizes where he is. His curator, the man with the guard's face, approaches and says that Joe has successfully passed the professional training program and earned a promotion. He explains that the program has a side effect. You don't realize that not months, but only 1 hour has passed, and everything he experienced was an artificial simulation, almost like the Matrix, only not as cool. The curator praises Joe for his performance and invites him to his new office a few floors up. While the manager silently processes it all, the supervisor keeps praising the company, where there is always room for growth. Brought into the new office, the curator shows him how things are arranged and leaves, closing the door. Joe sits at the desk, takes out his phone, and calls his wife. For the first time in 10 years, he calls her in the middle of the day from work. He listens to her voice and sends greetings to their unborn child while experiencing flashbacks of the training program. Tears well in his eyes. Finishing the call, Joe carefully looks around the workplace, preparing to start working in exactly the same triangular office, only smaller, with a clock on the wall and ventilation. He now has to perform monotonous, pointless, useless tasks just to earn food and rare hours of rest. The only difference from the simulation is that now, supposedly, he does it voluntarily. But remembering how he dreamed of seeing his son instead of burning away at work, Joe looks into the camera and says he will destroy this corporation. On this false note, the film ends. If you want to see more videos like this, leave a like and subscribe. That helps my channel a lot. See you.